Hi, for those just joining, we're going to wait just another minute or two for everyone to log on and get settled. Hopefully you see three of us on the screen, as well as a slide with the topic for today. We have gone ahead and muted each of you and turned off the camera. So if you are having lunch, go ahead and have lunch. We won't be watching you. Okay, just a few more minutes. We've got almost 20 folks already logged in and anticipating several more. So we will get ready to start in just a few moments. So get settled. Make sure that you can hear and see the presentation. You should see three of us on the screen, as well as a slide of the topic for today. Oh, we've got several more guests joining. It's just 1 minute after noon. We'll anticipate starting in just a few moments. So get settled, hang tight, and we will be with you momentarily. Do know that you are muted, and we did turn off your webcam. So you should just see the three of us on the screen, as well as the slide for the discussion today. Hi, we're going to wait just another minute or two for folks to join the call today. It's just after noon Mountain Standard Time. We're here in Utah, a snowy actual April day, which is surprising. And we're still having earthquakes. So it's wild here in Utah. We are joined with Altera Medical, a Utah-based medical device company. We'll be starting in just a few moments, and hopefully you can hear me and see the three of us on the screen, as well as the slide for the discussion today. Just another minute or so, and we will begin today's Lunch and Learn. Hi, this is Elizabeth with Cambia Grove. We will begin in just one moment. Hopefully you can see and hear me, as well as Jason Sloan and Matt Toon. The screen for the slide today for the Lunch and Learn topic. We won't have any slides today, but we will follow up with a recording after the event. Just as a heads up, and we'll go over all of that in just a moment. Okay, well, let's begin. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Nebeker with Cambia Grove. Cambria Grove is a healthcare innovation hub. We are working to bridge the gap between the traditional healthcare system and entrepreneurs. Our goal is to transform our healthcare system to be person-focused and financially sustainable. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our very first virtual Lunch and Learn today with the topic Product Development and Strategy. We have gone ahead and muted your mics as well as turned off your webcam. So you should just see myself, Matt Toon, and Jason Sloan on the screen, as well as a slide. There will be a Q&A after the presentation, and you can see on the right side of your screen in that box a chat window. Please go ahead and record any questions that you have throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to get to as many of those after we hear from Jason and Matt. The format for today is a 30-minute presentation around product development and strategy by Altera Medical's Matt Toon and Jason Sloan. And then again, 15 minutes for Q&A. We'll wrap up just before 1 o'clock, which is Mountain Standard Time, so just under an hour. I'd like to give a big thank you to our presenting partner on today's Lunch and Learn, Rocky Mountain Venture Capital, Ron Hefferman and June Chen, for helping arrange this extremely relevant and timely conversation from a real-time experience based on this situation that we are all facing in this pandemic. So I am very excited to hear from our guests today. When we talk about product development, you know, a successful product development, and more importantly, commercialization doesn't happen in a vacuum. Investors are focused on minimizing risk. They want to know a company considers the 5 points of healthcare, which is the framework that Cambria Grove embraces, and all aspects of risk, clinical, competitive, and market risk. Today, our speakers are going to talk about risk that comes from a dramatic shift in prevailing economic and customer priorities. This is a real-time pivot that Altera Medical had to do mere 60 days ago, making a big change on their product development. So I am privileged and really grateful that they are squeezing out time in this very busy time for them to share their experience. And I know you're going to find it to be a very fascinating discussion. So please, once again, go ahead and add questions in the chat box, and we will get to those after the presentation. And now I'd like to turn the time over to the CEO of Altera Medical, Matt Toon, and the Director of Product Development, Jason Sloan. They'll do a brief introduction and then dive right into their real-time experience and learning. Matt?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to hear a few words of advice from us. These are definitely unprecedented times for all of us, and largely unforeseen for the most part. I'm currently CEO and founder of Altera Medical, general partner within the Mount Pacific Venture Studios. And I thought that would be interesting, especially given our previous topic was focused on product development and strategy, which really is the core foundation and principles of what Altera Medical was formed to do. And then kind of discuss a little bit about our business model, where we were going, and then kind of what happened with the global pandemic and where we're going now, and kind of the throes of what we've had to go through to make that pivot. It's a pretty interesting story and scenario, but just to kind of backpedal, I formed this company along with my partners, a little more than a year ago, largely to address a very significant market need that I saw in my previous roles, where I was heading product development, product marketing, business development, sales for other large, multinational conglomerates within the healthcare sector. And it was amazing to see the technologies that would cross your desk and the amazing technologies, great development pipelines and strategies, and but we were seeing in the marketplace the pivoting goalpost was moving further down the line of what was required in order to get a product on the market, and there's only so many companies you can take on in your portfolio, and we would see requests from, hey, will you seed fund us? Will you distribute our products, or will you actually acquire us outright? And so I saw a huge market need because there's more technologies than there were potential strategic alliances and acquisitions. And so we formed this company to address that need directly. In conjunction with our partners, Mount Pacific Venture Fund, we've actually formed what we call Mount Pacific Venture Studios to help address that, what I feel is a large market need that still needs further development and assistance in that area. So Mount Pacific Venture Fund, just to take a step back, is as an early stage life science fund where we invest in early stage companies. And we go through the whole gambit of due diligence and looking for companies with explosive growth. We de-risk the process, and then we take small seed investments in these companies, and we assist in raising money and assisting through whatever the stages of the commercialization process from there would be. Then transitioning to our other partner company, which is more along the lines of our management consulting, because we talk about de-risking and risk mitigation as part of the 5 Ps. We try to ensure that our portfolio companies are going through that process and truly ensuring that they de-risk it, because as you know, there's always different market needs, unmet needs, and sometimes you miss something along the way. So whether that is healthcare economics consulting, making sure you understand who's going to buy it, whether that is the just physician itself, whether it's the hospital, or whether it's the payer, making sure the appropriate data and clinical evidence is in place to ensure that the appropriate reimbursement is in place. I can't count how many times, even working in large organizations, we go to market assuming that the regulatory path is completely outlined, yes, but then we never thought about the healthcare economic studies and the necessary data that we needed to ensure that the product was going to be actually paid for and funded. We assumed just a standard DRG would be appropriate or enough, but that's been a really key aspect to what we're doing. Making sure that the appropriate regulatory and quality guidelines are in place. FDA approval necessarily isn't quite enough. Sometimes it's more than FDA approval. You need to make sure that the claims are appropriate for the market potential within you got the FDA approval for. You might have just got FDA approval for one thing, but then you can't market it for another because you don't have approval to market for that, but that's what the market need is. So making sure that those things are appropriately outlined, and then also making sure that the go-to-market strategy is appropriately characterized, that you stratified the market, you understand what those the segments that you're going for, the appropriate value proposition, and the positioning statements are in place and as you go to market. And then the third pillar to our ecosystem is Altera Medical, which I characterize Altera Medical as a commercialization engine for early stage life sciences. I mentioned earlier about the unmet market need of helping these companies get to revenue. Just because you have a FDA approval or you have a patent or IP isn't enough anymore. Companies are de-risking that process, and they want to prove that this product is going to work, because myself included, we bought companies and then we realized that the finished product wasn't quite appropriate for the market. So how do we de-risk that process? And the way that you can de-risk the process and ensure that you're going to get the appropriate valuations you want for your company is really sales. And then you plug it into that ecosystem, and then you can create a valuation and move that process forward. So at Altera Medical, we created that ecosystem where we help these companies. We, of course, do the run-in stages to help them de-risk that process, whether it's, we even do preliminary CRO work and making sure that they've got all the appropriate customer voice of customer work done and that's ready for market. And then we have a national distribution network of sales reps that go out and help these companies get those products moving forward. I would say that we've been largely very successful through this ecosystem and timeline, and We've successfully commercialized and are commercializing several companies, primarily focused within the interventional spaces, radiology, cardiology, electrophysiology. What's really interesting is as we're going through this, we're scaling, we're growing, we're adding resources, we're looking to the future. Very excited about the growth prospects of what we have already in place with our sales organizations, but then also where we can go in the future, and we're developing new channels for growth, both from a pipeline perspective of additional customers that came in to work with us, and helping those companies through that phase, but then also where could we go next? And then COVID-19 hit. As we all know, it came at breakneck speed. We had heard rumors overseas. We kind of knew what was going on, but no one had a real idea what that would look like within ourselves and our own ecosystem and organization. But we were already kind of taking some preliminary steps to potentially get ahead of it. And we've, largely through our networks and people that we work with, we had looked for some preliminary solutions that maybe could address this if they ever got bad within the US marketplace. And we were actually working on some of those solutions even, I think, a couple weeks before the pandemic really started hitting, which put us in a very, very unique position, because we were still at that pivoting point where our existing business was still on the way up. We had another development pipeline that kind of we were unsure where that was going to meet and what we would do with that. And then once it hit, our existing business basically disappeared almost overnight because with the lockdowns and the quarantines and even cardiology procedures were viewed as elective procedures within these hospital systems. So almost overnight, our core revenue stream virtually disappeared. And we were looking for ways that we could, how could we keep things moving forward without having to, furlough, let people go, change trajectories. Luckily, we had these other alternate backup systems in place where we literally, largely thanks to Jason, and he'll share the experience and what we went through, we're able to take another facility and developing a manufacturer that was previously manufacturing pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical, antimicrobial solutions to manufacturing hand sanitizer. The same medical grade formulation that the healthcare systems and governments are used to, we were able to pivot and actually take a facility from virtually zero to manufacturing at full speed over a 30-day period, from almost zero to now. And we're basically at 100% allocation, and it's just been an incredible story. And dealing with global supply chain logistics and being at the throes of what's going on with the global pandemic response, it's been quite a pivot. That's also led to other opportunities where we have pre-existing relationships with other, sanitation and infection prevention solutions in place, to the point where now we found ourselves being trusted suppliers because of our relationships we had. We were already vendors within hospitals. They would turn to us as a trusted supplier for these solutions, and then they would, leverage our network to source supplies, whether it's overseas, our domestic suppliers of our, other solutions that were needed. We were able to, basically become trusted suppliers for some of the largest healthcare systems in the country and even all levels of the U.S. government. It's been quite a pivot, and we're very proud to say that we've been growing and scaling and adding resources, and our trajectory hasn't changed. We haven't had to lay anybody off. In fact, we've had to significantly increase our organization and scale to meet these needs. And now we've actually believed that we don't believe, we know that we have a long-term supply relationships with these entities that's going to be in place long after the pandemic leaves. And one thing that's interesting is our existing customers that we were working on commercializing, some of the ones that we had in the pipeline and we're working through the product development cycle and helping them get ready for that launch phase, kind of took a little bit of a pause as our resources and focus had to, get things going. But through our relationships, whether it's the government or these pandemic response teams, specifically in these hotspots, or, you name it, FEMA, whatever the organization is we're working with, we have relationships now where we can now shifting some of these technologies and telemedicine and remote monitoring that we were actually getting ready to launch now could be shifted and used towards these focus on telemedicine, and how can we integrate our supply approach with pandemic response and create a trusted, total encompassing solution within these verticals. And these are the type of things that we're now able to leverage and put in place where we didn't previously have that opportunity. So, but you know, with that, I'll turn the time over to Jason, kind of talk a little bit about kind of that transition and metamorphosis from where we were previously going to how he led that transition, because Jason is the one who led the transition to being able to assess and having the foresight to see where that was coming and then pivot quickly our entire operations over to meeting those needs. So.
Great.
Thank you, Matt. So, you know, as Matt outlined, the transition that we've gone through recently has been quite earth-shattering. You know, I think it's affected everybody to a big degree. And as we started to see the news that was coming out and understand, you know, what the challenges would be facing, we expected over the next, you know, month or two or beyond for the U.S. healthcare market, we had already, you know, looking at our pipeline of potential products to bring to market, I think we had about 10 plus that we were looking at. And part of what we've done is group those into focus segments. And it just so happened that a couple of those in that focus segment were around antimicrobial, around disinfectants and that. We had already established some relationships with a couple organizations, US based, looking at actually doing some manufacturing of this product. When everything hit, as Matt mentioned, it put kind of a freeze, and I think everybody, at least for the first couple of weeks, kind of grabbed on and took a big pause. We were able, through this one relationship, to begin looking at how we can address what these market needs as we heard more stuff about challenges of shortages and that. And just to give a little background, and I know everybody sees the news these days and the challenges with PPE and other supplies. That is a very real challenge out in the marketplace that I think if you haven't been in it, and I'm sure some of you on this call have been involved or know people that are involved in what the sourcing looks like, you know, over these last few weeks, we've been on phone calls at midnight with procurement on the weekend, suppliers at large health systems that are scrambling to get stuff together. And, you know, we look at what we're doing now with supplying sanitizer and some disinfectant as being able to fill that void and help bring into the market additional supply to meet those challenges. And when we think about how we bring this into the market, it's not just you know, meeting this individual need, but how do we take this pivot? And this pivot has been our entire system, as Matt mentioned. It's been, you know, the 30 plus salespeople we have in our direct sales team, but also in something we had been looking at for some of our technologies was developing a broader channel solution for some of the technologies we were working with. And in a way, on the outset, you would believe that the COVID-19 and the challenges with that may have slowed things down, but in reality for us, it has really accelerated things. So I think Matt mentioned, we realized within that first week that we had to bring in some additional support and headcount. We, you know, we added a couple distribution logistics people just in that first week to be able to help us start managing the movement of these supplies. So identifying the ability to bring these products to market and then to move them to where they're needed quickly. And that changed a lot around, you know, before we were really focused on identifying the technologies and moving them through these steps, you know, through this commercialization process, making sure they had the health economics and making sure all of those things. We had these products that didn't quite need to go through that same steps, but in going through this and understanding and having these conversations with these large organizations, it sort of opened our eyes to other areas and how they're starting to think differently about what they provide. You know, when will the opportunity for reps, non-essential employees, be there for them to go into hospitals again? So if we're thinking about launching new technologies and new products, how will we ensure that they have, or, you know, whether it's our reps or a channel or this new technology gets visibility into there. And because of what we developed with our first couple of products out and how we had become a trusted vendor, we were able to leverage those relationships, but also open new ones that we hadn't quite achieved that status. But as they needed these additional supplies, it allowed us to facilitate getting into a secured or preferred vendor situation. And because of the rapid response we've been able to deliver, we've actually had health systems that have looked at doing long-term agreements for some of these supplies. This, we believe, will help us as we start to turn our focus over the next couple of months back towards what is really our core objective and what brought Matt and I into this space, which is developing new technologies and the value they can bring to the marketplace. And, you know, when we talk about the 5 Ps and we talk about, you know, putting together the right go-to-market strategy, I think over Matt's career and myself, we know that there are a number of fantastic technologies, but the creation of that technology is just the beginning of it. It's what can that technology do? In other words, what can it replace or what can it do better than what was in the market before? And I always think of healthcare, and I know we have some people on the call that are from the large health organizations. I always think of it as a pie, and each health system has its own pie. And all of that pie is already allocated. So what am I going to offer with this new technology that replaces a piece of that pie that someone else may already have, or is going to make it better, so to speak? And as we think about how we move towards that in the future, we're going to have to think about it differently. It won't be just integrated into the health system, and that's what we're seeing through this response right now. So we have our 32 sales people that we kind of we're focused on these other highly engaged, physician engaged type products around, you know, the cardiology, radiology spaces, electrophysiology. Now we're on a broader conversation of procurement around hand sanitizer, disinfectants, sanitization products. And as that moves forward into stabilization of the system, when we think back, coming back to these other products and new products that we had kind of on the bench ready to launch into these health systems, how are we going to bring those into the health systems potentially without having that same direct access we had before? And that's where we're really developing more of that channel situation and can leverage these relationships. What we found is that when everything comes to a standstill and when the crisis hits, that everyone really goes back to the people they know and the relationships. And through the organization, through Altera, through, you know, Matt's 20 plus years, my 20 plus years, a couple other principles that we have, we found that we were getting quite a few calls with that. And so we've been able to take that and leverage that on the customer side and marry that with these relationships we had formed with these prospective technologies on the sanitizer and disinfectant side, and bring those two together. So, you know, and within that, it's been really getting the hands dirty in a way. We have been doing everything from sourcing bottles globally to looking for chemicals that help make sanitizer for the manufacturer, to becoming logistics experts and booking flights from China and working till 1, 2 a.m. to help do that, to help get those trusted supplies in, all the way across the entire supply chain. So there's some areas that I think we've almost become experts in just a short amount of time. But that pivot from Altera to bring that to life, while it was something that was necessary to keep the viability of the business in the short term, we believe now is going to strengthen the opportunities that we can bring in the long term. And I think one of the key lessons and messages out of that is when you are a trusted supplier and you've built a strong relationship, your ability to respond to those customers in any capacity becomes a big asset in value. So today, as Matt mentioned, we are supplying roughly in various sizes over 20,000 gallons of sanitizer to health systems and federal government across the U.S. And what I would point out, and just a reminder, is 4 weeks ago we were supplying 0, and this manufacturing site was manufacturing really 0 gallons. And lead times for supplies in that have gone from to be a couple days to now weeks and even months into the future. So being able to step in and do that for those customers has been very rewarding. But what we're doing is trying to take that learning and think about what we're doing and pivoting that into the next stage of of product development, and looking at these new technologies in a different way. That, and then what needs both patients and providers and systems are going to be. So there's still a lot more to come with that. And, I think before, where there was a challenge of how quickly can I bring things to market, one of the bright spaces, I think, in any of this is that it has loosened some of the pathway to FDA approval. And if there's a product or a technology that was sitting on the sidelines and we're looking at significant time periods to bring to market, there are some technologies, within our bench that we were expecting were going to be a year and a half out, that now we're looking to bring to market in 3 to 6 months, because the value that it plays in either a remote or telemedicine area is significantly increased. So that's kind of where we are today. It's been a kind of a bit of a wild ride. I don't know that I've ever worked as hard in the last 4 weeks and gone through with as little sleep as I have. But it's been extremely rewarding, especially to get phone calls and even in the middle of the night from some of these health systems to be able to provide them the products they need or for their employees, or sending stuff into some of the hot zones. Really do feel that we're doing something good and providing something back. And our goal has not been to maximize any sort of profit or revenue, but to continue to build those relationships that would allow us to be even more successful as we bring new products to market.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jason and Matt. Really a fascinating experience. And I think, when we did the pre-call, the question is, what will it look like after the pandemic? What will we learn? You mentioned the bright spot really being, the loosened regulatory and approval process. But is that long term? I guess, is that something that you feel like there will be that action that will continue? Or are you feeling optimistic in that, those changes that will actually impact and create, more efficient, speedier mechanism?
I'll let Jason take that as well, but what we're seeing is it depends on the categorization of the product. So I think anything associated with pandemic response is something that definitely will get obviously a shortened regulatory timeline and review process. I think there has been some awareness around that, but I think there could be some delays on some of the actual medical device class 2 and class 3s, because a lot of the FDA focus is we've actually worked with these, different people around these pandemic products, because we've actually taken products that didn't have approvals and tried to push these through and work through the process, making sure their appropriate labeling would be appropriate for entering the U.S. marketplace or whatever the situation is. So having that background of regulatory and quality has been really, really key. But I do believe that there's probably going to be more. There will be I think there will be a shift and a change And I think there'll be expedited approvals for products that can focus on those key areas. So what are your thoughts, Jace?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree. It's going to be somewhat category specific, but things around telemedicine, around antimicrobial, those kinds of things are going to really be, I think, advanced. I think there's an interest in how can we do things better, and it's going to continue, I think, to accelerate probably for another year, I would think, until there is some sort of either a vaccine or anything along those lines. I think there'll be two types of potential healthcare. There'll be the healthcare that was normal before, where people went in and took care of things, and there's going to be your high-risk patients. And I think there's going to be a drive to how do you manage and treat high-risk patients, those with underlying conditions or those with those more elderly patients, that you can provide them services without having to put them out in the general public and expose you.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Ryan. He is curious if you work with direct-to-consumer companies.
We've kind of taken this stage approach. Obviously, we've had several requests from the direct-to-consumer companies. Yes, we have done some individual agreements, but we've waited till our primary demand in the healthcare sector was met first. But then now we have taken on direct-to-consumers with requests for various private label opportunities and things that they can work within their customer bases. But now that we're through this first phase and normalizing some of the healthcare supply, we are taking on the direct-to-consumer, especially as you see the healthcare wave peak in the spike, and now we anticipate coming down soon. Employers, employees, and large industrial suppliers are reaching out in droves to us to get their employees ready to come back to work in the new environment, because it won't be the same as what it was going into. They fully anticipate and expect that. So they're trying to find a way that they can source the appropriate products, protect their employees, and we're trying to work on shortened supply chain ways to do that with them. So.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a lot of opportunities are still available as we see how everything unfolds with the pandemic. Jason, we have a question specific to the COVID and your pivot around that. What sounds like you've learned a lot and have been working with federal and health care systems, but what has been the most surprising piece that you've seen in all of this in your last 30 days?
Really, the most surprising thing to me is how stressed the supply chain system is, and how unprepared I think the organizations were for this, both in and out of the frontline workers, so the hospitals and the systems. For years it's really been a focus on just-in-time supply, and people would have warehouses and you'd order something in the morning, it'd arrive in the afternoon, and people were running on just a couple days of supplies, and that went all the way through to the manufacturers, and so everything was able to turn around in 2 and 3 days. And we can make 10,000 more gallons of sanitizer a day. The challenge that we have is the bottling, the raw materials to go into that aren't as readily available, and how that global supply chain got taxed very quickly in this type of situation. And we've heard from a number of organizations, both healthcare and non-healthcare, that have said they will not do this again. They will not rely on one supplier. They will look to significantly increase safety stock, and that there is value in having at least some products that are sourced, especially these important products that are sourced domestically. And yeah, I mean, the supply chain and lack of ability to adapt to the situation has really surprised me. I didn't realize how quickly that could start to break down.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got a question from Lindsay. She's asking, how do you think go-to-market strategies and the R&D pipeline will continue to be influenced by these times? Matt, do you want to take?
Yeah, I'll take that. Just take the next one. Honestly, it's an unknown at this point because obviously there's an expectation from physicians that things will normalize, and depending on the acuity of the procedures that are going to be done. Given the economic impact, there's still question marks around what is going to go on with the electives in the short term. Obviously, we believe long-term things will normalize to some extent, but to Jason, like Jason said, several hospitals aren't anticipating normalization until there is some form of long-term treatment in place. Patient habits are going to change, that they're going to be more hesitant to go into a hospital environment and get a procedure done because of this. So that will definitely impact the elective procedures. That being said, in our core business, just because, COVID-19 hit, people still have heart conditions. People still need to get those taken care of. So most of the physicians and hospitals we talk to are still kind of waiting to see how that's going to play out. I believe just naturally from a supply and demand standpoint, you're going to see devices and things that address those issues more readily are probably going to go to the forefront and get more interest from a funding standpoint, and even from an interest on whether it's expedited regulatory approval, those things that can ease that. I believe the telemedicine area is going to explode exponentially. Reports are that the life cycle in that vertical is probably accelerated by 5 years because of what's happened from an adoption standpoint by patients. So we anticipate that's going to.
We just hosted a telehealth with AMA on Tuesday. Yeah, and it went, from 14% implementation to 90%. It's incredible that, fast track because of this. Yeah. Sorry.
It's amazing. And getting user interfaces streamlined, the whole entire ecosystem. We were working on some projects with some other systems on creating those integrated networks, so to speak, and I think those are just what's going to hit to the forefront. I think capital is going to be moving to those things as well, which will accelerate that process and timeline. But people are still going to get sick. I think the more cosmetic procedures and those type of things, those things, we'll see what happens. But until then, I think it's going to be hard to predict.
Okay, Gavin Johnson has a question. Do you use or know about any accelerated product development programs for new goods preventing nosocomial
infection?
Diseases from spreading on surfaces in hospitals?
So we've had a couple of technologies. Matt can speak on this a little bit as well. We've actually, even before this started, had a couple of technologies we were looking at in this space. And a couple of those have received some accelerated development. There's a number of things now, I think that, with everything that's happened, is getting a second look. But I mean, we've had some stuff that has gone through, review and approval in 60 days, where we were expecting about 9 months. So I mean, my answer to that would be yes. There's a couple opportunities for that, and we've seen that already.
I think one of the challenges is, and sometimes depends on the product line in the space. There's FDA approvals, but then in the infection prevention space, you also have EPA regulations, which is actually different as well. And those are done on a state-by-state basis, and they're trying to figure out how can you accelerate those timelines and within that program. So, as you're dealing with nosocomial infection as a disease, it's a very heightened process, and there's different ways you can go about doing that. It's just a matter of getting the right contact and right person. In this situation, we're dealing with some governmental authorities to expedite the testing. And the key to that program is getting, whether it's testing head-to-head against COVID-19, and anytime you can get that approved, it's almost like a free pass to move to the next phases of accelerated timeline. And so, yes, there are programs, and the government is aggressively looking at any and all opportunities to help companies usher through that. We've had other people we worked with go straight to the HHS, and they've kind of helped people move things along with that as well. So it just depends on how you want to approach it. But I think the traditional path and process, we're going to see some changes on that. And we work closely with our regulatory team. Spencer Walker's been a great asset for us as well. I think he's on this listing as well.
Yeah.
And so, it's a whole new world out there from a regulatory standpoint, but even the companies we work with have seen that as well.
All right, thank you.
Good question, Gavin. Jack had a question, again, back to telemedicine and the regulatory pathways. So within this potential year of accelerated regulatory pathways for telemedicine, are there new opportunities for technologies within the radiology, cardiology space as well?
Absolutely, because most of our physicians are doing telemedicine for their entire patient population. Most are only allowed a rotation once every 4 weeks into their hospital systems in particular. Otherwise, they're mandated to do everything from home. So yes, it's leading to new opportunities for them as well. There's a client we're working with that a product that also directly correlates to the heart failure space and management, and we've actually re-accelerated these timelines because we believe that there's an opportunity within the COVID-19, given the type of patients that are currently impacted by it and comorbidities associated with heart problems, heart conditions. So all these things kind of come into play, and we think a number of new devices that we had heard and were previously working with were in the development phases. It'll be easier to get funding and get those moving forward and accelerate those timelines if it fits within this ecosystem. And I expect you're going to see a lot more devices even pivoting their development plans to try and adapt to this as a potential vertical as well. So that maybe they didn't have whether it's telemedicine or whatever application, but there's ways you can go about getting that tied in with that as well. So.
Great. Well, we have time for probably one or two more questions before we wrap up. And why don't we talk, looks like we've got one. From Penny, what do you think the biggest changes that will come out of the COVID learnings for Altera Medical?
I'll let Jason back first.
Well, I mean, I think the first one for us is, as we look across our organization, is having a presence in different verticals within the market. So, before we were very heavy in the interventional space, cardiology, electrophysiology, radiology, which when this hit, all of that pretty much came to a standstill. Luckily, we had on deck these other technologies and this relationships that we could quickly accelerate to be able to make that pivot. For an organization like Altera, being able to have those very vertical markets that we can continue to move towards was huge for us, and really put us into an accelerated growth stage instead of a stagnant stage. That being said, for entrepreneurs in that have a new technology in one particular space, thinking about the ability to be able to pivot based on what happens with changing market dynamics. So going forward, I would say I think there's probably a bigger learning that in preparation for a product launch or a market launch is thinking about, now you're putting into that what happens if the system gets shut down or the system pivots, and building that into the, kind of the plan of what launch would look like if some of these things happen that before you may not have thought could be a possibility. I don't know if you want to add anything, Matt.
No, I think that's exactly right. Diversification is key, and making sure you have contingency plans in place and ready to enact and execute. I think that previously we always would consult with the companies that we work with to make sure you have a contingency plan if your primary plan doesn't get executed, which primarily was okay. If the user requirements aren't exactly what you expected when you got to market, what's your contingency plan? Several companies we've seen and tried to pitch with us, their entire commercialization plan is we're going to get acquired. Okay, well, that's great. Well, what happens if your user requirements aren't exactly what you thought they were, and then you have to pivot? Well, you fund it up until you're going to get acquisition a few months after you're commercialized or even pre-commercialization. We've one client who previously was focused on pre-revenue valuations, and they're going to get acquired pre-revenue. Well, now with this hit, that might not be the case, and they've approached us back to help them actually get to revenue, those type of cycles and things like that. So you just always have a contingency plan in place and being able to execute and be nimble. I think has been one of the key learnings for me. And I think just really it comes down to surrounding yourself with really, really good people is the execution. Just if you put the best people, regardless of whatever it takes to get them on your team, the potential to get the favorable outcome that you want and expect is going to be critical. So don't compromise on the people that you work with, was the other one. So.
Well, that's a great way to end this discussion. Thank you very much, Matt and Jason. Really amazing work that you're doing to really step up and support our healthcare system and all of us fight this pandemic and protect each of us. So really impressive work that you're doing. Do try and get some sleep and make sure you take care of yourself. I also want to once again thank our partner Rocky Mountain Venture Fund for supporting us and helping arrange this discussion today. And a big shout out to all of you that took time out of your busy schedule to join us for this discussion and really be part of our community, our healthcare innovation community, as we all work together to help transform healthcare. We will have lots of virtual events coming up, so do be sure to check out our website at cambiagrove.com and do check out our new membership program that we just recently launched. Take care of yourself, and we will follow up with an email with a recording of this event and look forward to continuing to work together and build and develop our Cambia Grove community. So thank you, have a great afternoon, and take good care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Pleasure. Thanks.